Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in the corner office of Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Chicago. At 28, she possessed a sharp mind for digital strategy that could turn struggling brands into household names, but her soft-spoken nature often left her contributions overlooked in the loud, competitive world of advertising. She would sit in meetings, watching as her carefully researched ideas were dismissed with a polite nod, only to see similar concepts presented by louder voices weeks later to great acclaim. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in March. Sarah arrived at the office 30 minutes early, as was her habit, carrying her usual black coffee and a notebook filled with campaign ideas she had sketched out over the weekend. The 20th floor of the glass tower buzzed with the familiar energy of account executives making calls to clients on the West Coast, taking advantage of the time difference to close deals before lunch. Marcus Chen occupied the office directly across from Sarah's cubicle. At 32, he was everything she was not: loud, confident, and seemingly effortless in his ability to command attention. His Harvard MBA hung prominently on his wall, a constant reminder to everyone of his pedigree. Marcus had joined Henderson and Associates 6 months after Sarah, yet his trajectory had been meteoric. While Sarah had spent 3 years slowly building client relationships and developing her expertise, Marcus had leveraged his networking skills and polished presentations to secure the position of senior account manager within 18 months. The source of Marcus's growing jealousy was not immediately apparent to casual observers. On the surface, he appeared to be the golden boy of the agency, the one management turned to for high-stakes presentations and the colleague everyone wanted to impress. But Marcus had begun to notice something that gnawed at him during quiet moments in his pristine corner office. Sarah's clients loved her, not in the superficial way that clients appreciated Marcus's flashy presentations and expensive lunches, but with a genuine trust and loyalty that translated into long-term contracts and consistent revenue growth. The Henderson Group's largest client, a chain of eco-friendly restaurants called Green Leaf, had specifically requested to work exclusively with Sarah after she had quietly salvaged their failing social media campaign the previous year. While Marcus had been busy pursuing splashy new accounts that looked good on his quarterly reports, Sarah had been steadily building a portfolio of deeply satisfied clients who renewed their contracts without hesitation. The first sign of Marcus's jealousy manifested during a staff meeting in late March. David Henderson, the company's founder and CEO, was reviewing quarterly performance numbers when he paused at Sarah's client retention statistics. 96% retention rate. The number hung in the air like a challenge, especially when contrasted with the industry average of 72%. "Sarah," David said, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile, "I'd like you to present your client relationship strategies to the entire team next week. It's clear you've discovered something the rest of us need to learn." The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and anxiety. She had never presented to the full team before. That privilege had always belonged to senior staff like Marcus. "Of course, Mr. Henderson," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'd be happy to share what's been working." As the meeting concluded and staff members filed out, discussing lunch plans and afternoon deadlines, Marcus lingered near the coffee station. His jaw was set in a way that his assistant, Jenny, had learned to recognize as a sign of his displeasure. The presentation opportunity that should have gone to him, after all he was the senior account manager, had been handed to someone who barely spoke up in meetings. That evening, Marcus stayed late at the office, ostensibly to work on the Morrison Industries pitch that was due the following week. But instead of focusing on marketing strategies, he found himself researching Sarah's background, scrolling through her LinkedIn profile and the company's internal database. What he discovered only deepened his frustration. Sarah had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University with a degree in communications and a minor in psychology. Her previous work experience included 2 years at a small boutique agency where she had managed accounts for several local Chicago businesses, helping them triple their social media engagement and double their customer base. She had joined Henderson and Associates not because she couldn't find work elsewhere, but because she had specifically chosen the company for its reputation for prioritizing long-term client relationships over quick profits. More irritating to Marcus was the realization that Sarah's success was not accidental or lucky. Her approach to client management was methodical and thoughtful. She spent time understanding not just what her clients needed for their marketing campaigns, but what they needed as business owners trying to build something meaningful. When Greenleaf's founder, Maria Santos, had been struggling with work-life balance while expanding to 3 new locations, Sarah had researched stress management techniques for entrepreneurs and had quietly connected Maria with a business coaching service that specialized in sustainable growth strategies. These were not the kinds of efforts that showed up in quarterly reports or impressed senior management during budget meetings. They were the small, consistent actions that built trust and loyalty over time. Marcus realized that while he had been focused on impressing his superiors, Sarah had been focused on creating value for her clients. The Monday before Sarah's scheduled presentation, Marcus made his first calculated move. During the weekly team huddle, he casually mentioned to David Henderson that he had some concerns about putting too much pressure on junior staff members. "Sarah's a bright girl," he said, his tone carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than critical. "But I worry about throwing her into the spotlight too quickly. These team presentations can be overwhelming, especially for someone who hasn't had much experience with public speaking. Maybe I could co-present with her? You know, provide some support and ensure the presentation meets our professional standards." David considered this for a moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on his coffee mug. Marcus held his breath, hoping his suggestion would be accepted. "That's thoughtful of you, Marcus," David replied, "but I think Sarah can handle it. Sometimes our best insights come from fresh perspectives, and I'm curious to hear her approach without any filters." The rejection stung more than Marcus had expected. He had positioned himself as the helpful senior colleague offering mentorship and support, but David had essentially implied that Marcus's involvement might somehow diminish the value of Sarah's presentation. As Tuesday approached, Marcus's jealousy began to transform from a quiet resentment into active sabotage. He started making subtle comments to other team members about Sarah's sudden promotion and wondering aloud whether her client's success was really due to skill or simply luck with easier accounts. When the junior account coordinator, James, mentioned that he was looking forward to learning from Sarah's presentation, Marcus laughed and said, "Well, let's hope she can handle the pressure." It's different when you're presenting to the whole team instead of just chatting with friendly clients. But Marcus underestimated both Sarah's preparation and the intelligence of his colleagues. Sarah had spent the entire weekend preparing for her presentation, not just organizing her thoughts and creating slides, but practicing her delivery until her voice was steady and her confidence genuine. She had reached out to 3 of her most successful clients and asked for their permission to share specific case studies that demonstrated her methods. Meanwhile, several team members had begun to notice Marcus's subtle undermining comments. Lisa Park, the creative director who had worked at the agency for 8 years, pulled Sarah aside on Monday afternoon. "I don't know if anyone's mentioned this to you," Lisa said quietly, "but Marcus has been making some comments about your presentation. Don't let him get in your head. You've earned this opportunity, and we're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say." The validation from Lisa, whom Sarah deeply respected, was exactly what she needed to hear. It also served as her first indication that Marcus's jealousy was becoming visible to others, though she didn't yet understand the full extent of his resentment. Tuesday morning arrived with an unseasonably warm breeze that carried the scent of blooming trees through the office windows. Sarah arrived even earlier than usual, using the quiet time to review her notes one final time and set up the conference room for her presentation. She had decided to arrange the chairs in a semicircle rather than traditional rows, hoping to create a more collaborative atmosphere. As team members began filtering into the conference room at 10 o'clock, Sarah noticed Marcus enter last, taking a seat in the back corner where his expressions would be visible to the rest of the team. She interpreted this as a power move, a way of positioning himself as a judge of her performance, rather than a colleague learning from a peer. What Sarah didn't realize was that Marcus had made a critical miscalculation. By positioning himself as skeptical and superior, he had inadvertently created a dynamic where Sarah became the underdog that everyone was rooting for. His subtle eye rolls and barely concealed smirks during her introduction only served to make the rest of the team more invested in her success. Sarah began her presentation with a simple question. How many of you have had a client relationship that felt effortless, where the client trusted your judgment completely and renewals were never in question? A few hands went up around the room. What I want to share with you today are the specific strategies that have helped me create that feeling with 96% of my client base. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah walked the team through her client relationship philosophy, backing up each point with concrete examples and measurable results. She talked about her practice of sending personalized check-in emails that had nothing to do with current projects, just to ask how the client's business was doing and whether they had any concerns that might affect their marketing needs. She shared how she had started including small business resources in her monthly reports, articles about industry trends, invitations to networking events, and connections to other service providers that might benefit her clients. Most powerfully, she presented 3 case studies that demonstrated how this approach had not only retained clients, but had led to organic referrals and expanded contracts. Greenleaf had referred 2 other restaurant groups to the agency specifically because of their experience with Sarah. A small tech startup she had been working with for 2 years had just signed a contract extension worth 40% more than their original agreement, not because Sarah had sold them additional services, but because their business had grown so successfully with her marketing support that they needed expanded campaign management. The room was completely silent, except for the soft scratch of pens on paper as team members took notes. Even Marcus found himself unconsciously leaning forward, despite his intention to remain disengaged. Sarah concluded her presentation by opening the floor for questions, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Account executives wanted to know how she identified which clients would respond well to personal attention. The creative team asked about how she balanced authentic relationship building with professional boundaries. Project managers inquired about time management strategies for maintaining such close client contact while still meeting deadlines. For 20 minutes, Sarah fielded questions with confidence and specificity, providing actionable advice that her colleagues could implement immediately. Her earlier nervousness had completely disappeared as she found herself in the familiar territory of helping others solve problems and improve their work. David Henderson, who had been listening intently throughout the presentation, stood up as the question and answer session wound down. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of thinking that's going to keep Henderson and Associates competitive in an increasingly crowded market. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting with you this week to discuss how we can implement some of these strategies company-wide." The room erupted in spontaneous applause, something Sarah had never experienced in her 3 years at the company. As her colleagues began filing out, many stopped to personally thank her for the insights and to ask follow-up questions about specific strategies. Marcus remained in his seat until the room had nearly emptied, then approached Sarah with what he hoped appeared to be a collegial smile. "Nice job," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Some interesting ideas in there." "Thank you," Sarah replied, beginning to pack up her materials. She could sense there was more he wanted to say, but she wasn't sure how to interpret his body language. "I'm curious," Marcus continued, "how do you plan to scale these very personal approaches when your client load inevitably increases? It seems like this system might work well for a smaller portfolio, but I wonder about efficiency at higher volumes." The question was phrased as professional curiosity, but Sarah detected an undertone that felt more like a challenge. "That's a great question," she said thoughtfully. "I think the key is building systems that feel personal, but can be managed efficiently. For example, I use a CRM that tracks personal details about each client, their business anniversaries, expansion plans, even their kids' graduation dates. It takes a few extra minutes to input that information, but it allows me to send meaningful communications without having to remember everything manually." Marcus nodded, but his expression suggested he found her answer inadequate. "Right. But there's still the question of billable hours. When you're spending time on relationship maintenance that doesn't directly relate to active projects, how do you justify that to management?" Sarah paused. Realizing that this conversation was revealing something important about Marcus's approach to client work. "I don't track that time separately," she admitted, "because I see relationship maintenance as integral to every project I manage. It's not an add-on service. It's part of how I ensure that every campaign I create is tailored to what the client actually needs and will actually use." This answer clearly frustrated Marcus, though he tried to hide it. In his world, every hour had to be justified and billed to someone. The idea that Sarah was essentially providing free consulting services to her clients struck him as both naive and unsustainable. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose we'll see how management feels about that approach when they look at profit margins." As Marcus walked away, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. She had just experienced her first direct confrontation with his jealousy, though she didn't yet recognize it for what it was. Instead, she wondered if he might be right about the sustainability of her methods. But what Sarah didn't know was that her presentation had already begun to change the dynamics at Henderson and Associates in ways that would prove impossible for Marcus to control. 3 of her colleagues had taken detailed notes and were planning to implement modified versions of her strategies with their own clients. Lisa Park had immediately started brainstorming ways to incorporate more personal touches into the creative briefs she developed. Even David Henderson had spent his lunch break researching customer relationship management systems that could help the entire team track client preferences and personal details more effectively. Most significantly, Sarah's confidence had been fundamentally altered by the experience of being heard and valued by her colleagues. For 3 years, she had operated under the assumption that her quiet, relationship-focused approach was somehow less valuable than the flashy presentations and aggressive sales tactics that seemed to impress management. The enthusiastic response to her presentation had shown her that her methods were not just effective, but pioneering. That afternoon, as Sarah returned phone calls from clients and reviewed campaign performance metrics, she found herself sitting a little straighter and speaking with a little more authority. When Maria Santos from Greenleaf called to discuss expanding their social media presence to include TikTok marketing, Sarah didn't hesitate to recommend a comprehensive strategy that would require a significant budget increase. "I trust your judgment completely," Maria said. "You've never steered us wrong, and our revenue has increased by 30% since we started working with you. Whatever you think we need, let's do it." As Sarah hung up the phone and began drafting the proposal for Greenleaf's expanded campaign, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer the quiet woman in the corner, hoping her work would speak for itself. She was becoming someone who understood her own value and wasn't afraid to claim the recognition she had earned. Meanwhile, Marcus spent the afternoon analyzing Sarah's presentation from every angle, looking for weaknesses he could exploit and strategies he could adapt for his own use. But what he failed to understand was that Sarah's success was not based on techniques that could be copied or undermined. It was built on a genuine care for her client's success and a willingness to invest time and effort in relationships that went beyond transactional exchanges. His jealousy, which had started as a minor irritation at her unexpected recognition, was beginning to transform into something more dangerous. A need to prove that his approach was superior and that Sarah's success was somehow undeserved. This transformation would drive his actions in the coming weeks and months, ultimately creating the very conditions that would launch Sarah from the shadows into a position of power that neither of them could have imagined. The week following Sarah's presentation brought an unexpected surge of attention to her work methods. David Henderson had scheduled a follow-up meeting for Friday afternoon, and word had spread throughout the office that management was considering implementing some of Sarah's relationship-building strategies as company-wide best practices. For someone who had spent 3 years working largely unnoticed, the sudden spotlight was both exhilarating and uncomfortable. Marcus watched this development with growing alarm. His position as senior account manager had always been secure, built on his ability to bring in new clients and deliver polished presentations that impressed both prospects and management. But Sarah's approach threatened to shift the agency's priorities from acquisition to retention, from flashy results to sustainable relationships. If client retention became the primary metric for success, his entire value proposition would be undermined. On Thursday morning, Marcus requested a private meeting with David Henderson. He had spent the previous evening crafting his approach, deciding to position himself as concerned about the company's strategic direction rather than personally threatened by Sarah's success. "David, I wanted to discuss the response to Sarah's presentation," Marcus began, settling into the leather chair across from Henderson's mahogany desk. "While I think her ideas have merit, I'm concerned about the broader implications for our growth strategy." Henderson looked up from his computer screen, giving Marcus his full attention. "Go on." "Well," Marcus continued, "Sarah's approach works beautifully for established clients who are already committed to working with us. But it's incredibly resource-intensive. If we implement these strategies across the board, we'll be spending significantly more time on existing clients, which means less time pursuing new business. In an industry where growth is essential for survival, I worry that we might be inadvertently limiting our potential." Henderson leaned back in his chair, considering this perspective. Marcus pressed his advantage. "Additionally, Sarah's clients tend to be smaller businesses with modest budgets. Her retention rate is impressive, but when you look at the actual revenue numbers, they're not necessarily driving the kind of growth we need to compete with larger agencies. My concern is that if we shift our entire focus to her model, we might find ourselves with a very happy but ultimately small client base." It was a carefully constructed argument that contained enough truth to be compelling. Sarah's clients were indeed smaller than some of Marcus's accounts, and her methods did require time investment up front. What Marcus didn't mention was that Sarah's clients had some of the highest profit margins in the agency's portfolio, specifically because they required fewer hours of crisis management and almost never demanded expensive revisions or last-minute changes. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "Those are valid concerns, Marcus. What would you suggest?" "I think we should implement Sarah's strategies selectively, perhaps create a specialized retention team that can focus on client relationship management while the rest of us continue pursuing growth opportunities. That way, we get the benefits of both approaches without sacrificing our expansion goals." The suggestion was clever in its apparent reasonableness. It would essentially segregate Sarah into a specialized role that kept her away from new business development while allowing Marcus to maintain his position as the primary growth driver for the agency. But David Henderson had not built a successful agency by accepting surface-level analyses. "That's an interesting idea," he said, "but I'd like to see some more detailed projections." Can you put together a comparison of revenue per client hour across our current portfolio? I want to understand whether Sarah's approach actually limits profitability or enhances it. Marcus agreed to the assignment, though his confidence in the argument was already beginning to waver. He had been so focused on the amount of time Sarah spent with her clients that he hadn't actually calculated whether that time investment produced better financial results. While Marcus was meeting with Henderson, Sarah was experiencing the first concrete benefits of her newfound visibility. Lisa Park had approached her about collaborating on a pitch for a potential new client, a sustainable clothing company looking for an agency that could understand their values-driven approach to business. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that would have gone to Marcus automatically just a week earlier. I think your relationship-building philosophy would be perfect for this client, Lisa explained, as they sat in the small conference room, sketching out initial concepts. They're specifically looking for an agency that can help them build authentic connections with consumers, not just drive immediate sales. Sarah felt a familiar excitement as she listened to Lisa describe the company's mission and target market. This was the type of client work that energized her, helping businesses that cared about making a positive impact reach customers who shared their values. I'd love to work on this, Sarah said, but shouldn't Marcus be involved? He usually handles the larger prospects. Lisa shook her head. David specifically asked me to work with you on this one. He thinks your approach might be exactly what they're looking for. This was news to Sarah, who hadn't realized that Henderson was already beginning to strategically deploy her skills for specific opportunities. It was also information that would have infuriated Marcus had he known about it. The sustainable clothing company called Earth Thread was exactly the kind of client that Sarah's methods were designed to serve. During the initial consultation call, she found herself asking questions that went far beyond typical marketing metrics. She wanted to understand the founder's personal journey towards sustainable fashion, the specific environmental impacts they were trying to address, and their long-term vision for changing consumer behavior in their industry. By the end of the 45-minute call, EarthThread's founder, Rebecca Kim, was visibly impressed. You're the first agency representative who's asked about our core mission, she said. Most consultants want to jump straight into talking about conversion rates and click-through percentages. Those metrics matter, Sarah replied, but they're only meaningful if they're helping you reach the right customers for the right reasons. If we can help you connect with people who genuinely care about sustainable fashion, those customers will be more valuable in the long term than customers who are just responding to a clever ad. This philosophy resonated deeply with Rebecca, who had started Earth Thread after becoming frustrated with the fast fashion industry's environmental impact. She had been looking for a marketing partner who understood that building a sustainable business required building sustainable customer relationships. The following week, Earth Thread chose Henderson and Associates for their marketing campaign, specifically requesting to work with Sarah as their primary account manager. The contract was worth more than any individual account Sarah had previously managed. Not because Earth Thread had a massive budget, but because they were committed to a comprehensive multi-platform strategy that would unfold over 18 months. When David Henderson announced the new client win during the weekly team meeting, he made a point of crediting Sarah's relationship-building approach for securing the account. This is exactly the kind of client we want to attract, he said. Companies that value long-term partnerships and authentic communication. Sarah's methods are proving to be not just effective for retention, but powerful for acquisition as well. Marcus felt his carefully constructed worldview beginning to crumble. His argument about Sarah's approach limiting new business had just been dramatically disproven. Worse, the Earth Thread account was exactly the kind of prestigious, mission-driven client that enhanced an agency's reputation beyond its immediate financial value. That afternoon, Marcus made his second calculated move, though this one was born more from desperation than strategy. He approached two of Sarah's existing clients directly, offering to take over their accounts to free up Sarah's time for the new, larger Earth Thread project. His first call was to Tom Bradley, owner of a small chain of family restaurants that had been working with Sarah for nearly 2 years. Marcus positioned his offer as a generous gesture designed to help Sarah manage her expanding responsibilities. "I know how busy Sarah's been since taking on that new sustainable clothing account," Marcus said smoothly. "I wanted to reach out and offer to help manage your account so she doesn't become overwhelmed. I've been at the agency longer and have more experience handling multiple clients simultaneously." Tom's response was immediate and unequivocal. "I appreciate the offer, but Sarah is exactly who I want working on our marketing. She understands our family business in a way that's been incredibly valuable. Is she planning to stop working with us?" Marcus backpedaled quickly. No, nothing like that. I just thought you might benefit from having a more senior account manager." "More senior than Sarah?" Tom's voice carried a note of confusion. "She's been phenomenal for us. Our customer retention has improved by 40% since we started implementing her suggestions. Why would I want to change what's working?" The conversation ended politely but firmly, with Tom declining Marcus's offer and asking him to pass along his continued appreciation for Sarah's work. Marcus's second call, to the owner of a boutique fitness studio, went similarly. Both clients made it clear that their loyalty was specifically to Sarah, not to the agency in general. These calls would prove to be Marcus's most significant mistake, though he wouldn't realize it for several days. Both Tom and the fitness studio owner mentioned Marcus's offers during their regular check-ins with Sarah, framing them as curious but concerning developments. Sarah initially tried to give Marcus the benefit of the doubt, assuming he genuinely wanted to help her manage her workload. But when she casually mentioned the client calls to Lisa Park during lunch, Lisa's reaction was immediate and alarmed. "He went directly to your clients?" Lisa said, setting down her sandwich. "Sarah, that's not normal. Account transfers are always handled internally first with management approval. Going directly to clients without discussing it with you or David is, well, it's not appropriate." This conversation marked the moment when Sarah began to understand that Marcus's behavior wasn't motivated by helpfulness or professional concern. For the first time, she recognized his actions as deliberate attempts to undermine her growing success. The realization was both unsettling and oddly liberating. For months, Sarah had second-guessed herself when Marcus made subtle comments about her methods or questioned her strategies during team meetings. She had assumed his skepticism was based on legitimate professional concerns and had often wondered if he was right about the sustainability of her approach. Now, with the clarity that came from understanding his true motivations, Sarah could see that his criticisms were not based on objective analysis, but on personal jealousy. This insight gave her permission to trust her own judgment in ways she had never felt comfortable doing before. The following Monday, Sarah requested a meeting with David Henderson to discuss her expanding role and responsibilities. She had spent the weekend thinking carefully about how to approach the conversation, knowing that this might be her only opportunity to shape her career trajectory at the agency. "David," she began, settling into the familiar chair across from his desk, "I wanted to talk with you about some recent developments and get your perspective on where you see my role heading." Henderson smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask. You've had quite a remarkable month." Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've been approached by some colleagues about transitioning my existing clients to free up my time for larger accounts. While I appreciate the thought behind the suggestion, I'm concerned about the message it sends to clients who chose to work with Henderson and Associates specifically because of the relationship-building approach I've developed." This was a diplomatic way of addressing Marcus's unauthorized client outreach, without directly accusing him of sabotage. Henderson's expression grew serious as he processed the implications of her statement. "Someone approached your clients directly?" he asked. Sarah nodded. Two of them mentioned receiving calls suggesting they might benefit from working with a more senior account manager. Henderson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In his 30 years of running the agency, unauthorized client contact was one of the few offenses that could result in immediate termination. The fact that someone had gone behind Sarah's back to solicit her clients was not just inappropriate, it was potentially damaging to the agency's reputation. "I'll address that immediately," he said, "but I'm also glad you brought this up because it gives us an opportunity to discuss your future here. Sarah, I've been in this business for 3 decades, and I've never seen anyone achieve the kind of client loyalty you've built. More importantly, you've proven that your methods work for both retention and acquisition." Henderson leaned forward, his expression growing more animated. "I've been thinking about creating a new position, Director of Client Experience. It would involve training other account managers in your relationship-building strategies, developing company-wide standards for client communication, and serving as the senior manager for our most relationship-sensitive accounts." The offer was beyond anything Sarah had imagined when she walked into the office that morning. A director-level position would put her on equal footing with Marcus in terms of title and authority, while focusing on the work that she found most meaningful and impactful. "I'm very interested," she said carefully, "but I want to make sure I understand what this would mean for my existing clients. I don't want to abandon the relationships I've worked so hard to build." "You wouldn't be abandoning anyone," Henderson assured her. "You'd be keeping your key accounts, while also taking on the responsibility of helping other team members develop similar relationships with their clients. Think of it as scaling your impact across the entire agency." As Sarah walked back to her desk, her mind was buzzing with the possibilities that Henderson had outlined. A director-level position would give her the authority to implement her methods company-wide, potentially transforming how the entire agency approached client relationships. But she also understood that her promotion would fundamentally alter the power dynamics that Marcus had been trying to manipulate. Instead of being a junior employee whose methods could be questioned and undermined, she would be his peer, or potentially his superior, depending on how the organizational structure was reorganized. That afternoon, Sarah began documenting her client relationship strategies in detail, not just for her own reference, but as the foundation for the training programs she would soon be developing. For the first time in her career, she was thinking beyond her own client portfolio and considering how her approach could benefit the agency as a whole. Meanwhile, Marcus was becoming increasingly aware that his attempts to undermine Sarah's success were not only failing but were actively backfiring. His unauthorized contact with her clients had been discovered, and he had been called into a disciplinary meeting with Henderson that afternoon. While he hadn't been fired, he had been given a formal warning and told that any future unauthorized client contact would result in immediate termination. More troubling for Marcus was the growing recognition that Sarah's success was not a temporary fluke that could be discredited or contained. Her methods were being validated by increasingly impressive results, and management was clearly committed to expanding her influence within the agency. As he sat in his office that evening, reviewing his own client portfolio, Marcus was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. While he had been focused on undermining Sarah's success, his own performance had begun to decline. 2 of his clients had expressed frustration with communication lapses, and one account had decided not to renew their contract, citing a lack of personal attention and responsiveness. Marcus realized that he had become so preoccupied with monitoring and criticizing Sarah's work that he had neglected the fundamentals of his own client management. His jealousy had not only failed to damage Sarah's career, it had begun to damage his own. But rather than prompting self-reflection or a change in strategy, this realization only deepened Marcus's resentment. In his mind, Sarah's success was still undeserved, and her promotion was evidence of favoritism rather than merit. He began planning more sophisticated ways to undermine her credibility, not realizing that each attempt would only serve to highlight the strength and authenticity of her approach to client relationships. The stage was now set for a final confrontation that would determine not just Sarah's future at Henderson and Associates, but the fundamental direction of the agency's approach to client service. Marcus's jealousy had transformed from a minor workplace irritation into the driving force behind changes that would reshape the entire organization, though not in the way he had intended. The announcement of Sarah's promotion to Director of Client Experience came during the first week of May at the agency's monthly all-hands meeting. David Henderson had decided to make the promotion official after 2 weeks of watching Sarah seamlessly manage both her existing client portfolio and her new responsibilities with the Earth Threat account. Her ability to maintain the quality of her client relationships while taking on additional strategic responsibilities had convinced him that she was ready for director-level authority. The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. In the span of 6 weeks, he had watched Sarah transform from an overlooked junior account manager into his organizational equal. Worse, her new role as Director of Client Experience gave her authority over client relationship standards that would affect his own work methods and performance evaluations. As Henderson outlined Sarah's new responsibilities, Marcus found himself analyzing every word for hidden criticisms of his own approach. When Henderson mentioned that the agency would be implementing relationship-first protocols for all new accounts, Marcus heard an implicit judgment that his acquisition-focused methods were somehow inadequate. When Henderson praised Sarah's ability to understand client needs beyond immediate marketing objectives, Marcus interpreted it as a public dismissal of his more traditional sales approach. The final blow came when Henderson announced that Sarah would be conducting a series of training workshops for the entire account management team, designed to help everyone incorporate her relationship-building strategies into their client management methods. "I know change can be challenging," Henderson said, looking around the conference room, "but I'm confident that learning from Sarah's approach will make all of us more effective at what we do. Her methods have proven successful not just for client retention, but for acquisition and revenue growth as well." As the meeting concluded and staff members approached Sarah to offer congratulations, Marcus remained in his seat, feeling increasingly isolated and resentful. Several colleagues had already expressed enthusiasm about learning her techniques, treating the announcement as an opportunity for professional development rather than the implicit criticism that Marcus perceived it to be. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would prove to be his most destructive yet. Instead of attempting to adapt his methods or find ways to incorporate Sarah's strategies into his own work, he decided to escalate his opposition by taking his concerns to Henderson's business partner, Janet Morrison, who handled the agency's financial operations and strategic planning. Marcus had cultivated a professional relationship with Janet over the past year, often discussing revenue projections and growth strategies during casual conversations near the coffee station. He hoped that Janet's focus on financial metrics would make her more receptive to his concerns about Sarah's resource-intensive approach. "Janet, I wanted to discuss the recent organizational changes with you," Marcus began, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I'm concerned about the financial implications of implementing Sarah's client management strategies agency-wide." Janet looked up from her spreadsheets, giving him her attention. "What specifically concerns you?" Marcus had prepared for this conversation carefully, armed with time-tracking data and hourly billing comparisons that he hoped would support his argument. Sarah's approach requires significantly more unbiased time with each client, time that can't be directly billed to specific projects. If we implement her methods across all accounts, we could see a substantial decrease in billable hour efficiency. He presented a chart showing that Sarah spent approximately 20% more time on client communication than other account managers, focusing on activities like personal check-ins, industry research, and relationship maintenance that didn't directly relate to active campaigns. Additionally, Marcus continued, her client portfolio tends toward smaller businesses with limited budgets. While her retention rates are impressive, the actual revenue per account is below our agency average. I'm worried that if we shift our entire focus to her model, we might find ourselves working harder for less money. Janet studied the data Marcus had presented, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. She had built her career on financial analysis and strategic planning, and she appreciated the systematic approach Marcus had taken to presenting his concerns. But Janet had also been tracking agency performance metrics for the past quarter, and she had noticed some trends that Marcus's analysis failed to address. She pulled up her own spreadsheet on her computer screen. "This is interesting data, Marcus," she said, "but I think you might be missing some key factors in your analysis." Janet turned her monitor so Marcus could see the quarterly performance report she had been preparing for the board of directors. "While it's true that Sarah spends more time on each client, her clients also require significantly less crisis management time. Look at these revision request numbers." The spreadsheet showed that Sarah's clients averaged 1.2 revision requests per project, compared to an agency average of 3.4 revisions per project. Her clients also had the lowest rate of scope creep, budget overruns, and missed deadlines in the entire agency. "When you factor in the time saved on revisions and crisis management," Janet continued, "Sarah's clients are actually more profitable on a per-hour basis than most other accounts. Her upfront time investment pays for itself through smoother project execution and higher client satisfaction." Marcus felt his argument beginning to crumble, but he pressed forward with his prepared talking points. "Even so, there's the question of scalability. Sarah's approach might work for a small client load, but can it really be implemented across a larger portfolio without sacrificing growth opportunities?" Janet smiled, pulling up another section of her report. "Actually, that concern is what initially made me curious about Sarah's methods. But look at these numbers from the Earth Thread account." The Earth Thread project had been Sarah's largest account to date, with a budget that exceeded any of Marcus's current clients. Despite the increased complexity and scope, Sarah had managed the relationship with the same attention to detail and personal investment that characterized her work with smaller clients. "Sarah has demonstrated that her methods scale effectively," Janet said. "More importantly, Earth Thread has already indicated that they're planning to expand their contract for next year and have asked about bringing their parent company's other brands to our agency. That's the kind of organic growth that builds sustainable business." The conversation was going in exactly the opposite direction from what Marcus had intended. Instead of convincing Janet that Sarah's promotion was financially risky, he was being presented with evidence that her methods were more profitable than his own. But Janet wasn't finished. "Marcus, I appreciate you bringing these concerns to me, but I have to ask, have you considered adapting some of Sarah's strategies to your own client management approach? Her methods aren't proprietary secrets, they're relationship-building techniques that could benefit any account manager." This suggestion struck Marcus as fundamentally misguided. In his view, client relationships were secondary to results, and time spent on personal communication was time that could be better invested in developing new business opportunities. The idea that he should learn from someone he still considered his junior was professionally humiliating. "I understand the appeal of her approach," he said carefully, "but I think there's value in maintaining diverse management styles within the agency. My clients appreciate directness and efficiency. They don't necessarily want or need the kind of personal attention that Sarah provides." Janet nodded politely, but Marcus could see that his response had only reinforced her impression that he was resistant to professional growth. The conversation concluded cordially, but Marcus left Janet's office knowing that he had failed to build an ally in his campaign against Sarah's expanding influence. Meanwhile, Sarah was experiencing the reality of her new position with a mixture of excitement and overwhelming responsibility. Her first training workshop was scheduled for the following week, and she was nervous about presenting to colleagues who had significantly more experience in client management than she did. The irony was not lost on her that Marcus would be among the attendees, learning techniques from someone he had spent months trying to undermine. But Sarah had decided to approach the training sessions as collaborative learning experiences rather than opportunities to demonstrate her authority over her colleagues. She spent the weekend preparing interactive workshops that focused on practical implementation rather than theoretical concepts. Instead of lecturing about relationship-building philosophy, she designed role-playing exercises that allowed account managers to practice personal check-in conversations and client consultation techniques in low-pressure environments. The first workshop was scheduled for Tuesday morning with the entire account management team in attendance. Sarah had arranged the conference room in small circles rather than traditional rows, hoping to create an atmosphere of peer collaboration rather than hierarchical instruction. As team members filed into the room, Sarah noticed Marcus take a seat in the back, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language suggesting resistance. Several other colleagues seemed genuinely interested in learning new techniques, while a few appeared skeptical about whether Sarah's methods would work with their more corporate clients. Sarah began the session with a simple acknowledgement of these concerns. "I know that some of you work with clients who have very different expectations than my typical accounts," she said. "The goal today isn't to suggest that everyone should use identical approaches, but to explore techniques that might enhance whatever client management style you've already developed." This opening immediately diffused some of the resistance in the room. By framing her methods as enhancements rather than replacements, Sarah gave her colleagues permission to adapt her strategies in ways that fit their existing client relationships. The first exercise involved practicing personal check-in conversations, brief phone calls or emails designed to maintain client relationships between active projects. Sarah paired team members and had them role-play scenarios where one person was the account manager and the other was a busy client who might initially seem uninterested in casual conversation. Marcus found himself paired with Jenny Rodriguez, a junior account coordinator who managed several small nonprofit accounts. As they practiced the exercise, Marcus was surprised to discover that the personal attention techniques actually helped him uncover concerns about an upcoming campaign that the client, Jenny, had been hesitant to mention during formal project meetings. That was actually useful, Marcus admitted grudgingly as the exercise concluded. "I wouldn't have thought to ask about staffing changes affecting their marketing capacity." Sarah overheard this comment and felt a spark of hope that Marcus might be beginning to see the value in her methods. But she also recognized that one positive interaction didn't necessarily signal a fundamental change in his attitude toward her leadership. The workshop continued with exercises in client consultation techniques, crisis management through relationship leverage, and strategies for turning client feedback into relationship-strengthening opportunities. By the end of the 2-hour session, even the most skeptical attendees had identified at least one technique they wanted to try with their own clients. As the team filed out of the conference room, several colleagues approached Sarah with specific questions about implementing the techniques with their current accounts. Marcus lingered near the door, and Sarah hoped he might offer feedback or ask follow-up questions, but he left without saying anything additional. The real test of the workshop's effectiveness came over the following weeks, as account managers began implementing Sarah's techniques with their existing clients. The results were immediate and measurable. Client satisfaction scores improved across the board, and several accounts that had been considering switching agencies decided to renew their contracts after experiencing the enhanced personal attention. Most significantly, 3 new prospects that had been lukewarm about working with Henderson and Associates became enthusiastic clients after experiencing the relationship-focused consultation approach that Sarah had taught during the workshops. The agency's close rate for new business improved by 30% in just 1 month. These results caught the attention of industry publications and professional organizations. The Chicago Marketing Association invited Sarah to speak at their quarterly networking event about innovative approaches to client retention. A trade magazine, Agency Today, requested an interview about her methods and their impact on business growth. For Marcus, watching Sarah's growing industry recognition was perhaps the most painful aspect of her success. Not only had she surpassed him within their own agency, but she was gaining attention from the broader professional community. The techniques he had dismissed as naive and unsustainable were being celebrated as innovative and effective. The breaking point came during the agency's quarterly review meeting in late June. David Henderson was presenting the quarter's performance statistics to the entire team, and the numbers told a story that was impossible for Marcus to ignore or rationalize away. Client retention was at an all-time high of 94%. New client acquisition had increased by 40% compared to the same quarter the previous year. Revenue per client had grown by 22%, largely due to contract expansions and organic referrals. Most importantly, client satisfaction scores had reached levels that Henderson had never seen in his 30 years of running the agency. "I want to be clear," Henderson said, looking around the conference room. "These improvements are the direct result of implementing the relationship-first strategies that Sarah developed and taught to all of you. We're not just retaining clients more effectively. We're providing a level of service that's generating organic growth and industry recognition." Henderson paused, pulling up a PowerPoint slide that showed several recent accolades the agency had received. Agency Today has nominated us for their Client Service Excellence Award. The Chicago Marketing Association has asked Sarah to serve on their advisory board for client relations best practices. And we've received referrals from competitors who specifically mentioned our reputation for relationship-focused service. As Henderson continued outlining the agency's growing reputation and improved financial performance, Marcus felt his last hopes of discrediting Sarah's success finally collapse. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Her methods were not just effective for individual clients, but transformative for the agency as a whole. But more than professional disappointment, Marcus was forced to confront the fact that his jealousy had cost him opportunities for his own growth and success. While he had been focused on undermining Sarah, his own client relationships had deteriorated. 2 accounts had switched to competitors, citing lack of responsiveness and personal attention. His own performance reviews had become increasingly critical, with management noting his resistance to adapting new client service standards. The final revelation came when David Henderson asked to meet with Marcus privately after the quarterly review. Henderson's office, which had always felt welcoming and collaborative, now seemed formal and uncomfortable as Marcus settled into the familiar leather chair. "Marcus," Henderson began, his tone serious but not unkind, "I wanted to discuss your future here at the agency." Marcus felt his stomach drop, sensing that this conversation would not be the supportive career development discussion he had experienced in previous years. "Your performance this quarter has been concerning," Henderson continued, pulling out Marcus's performance evaluation. "Your client retention rate has fallen to 78%, well below our agency standard. 2 major accounts have cited communication issues as their primary reason for switching agencies. And frankly, your resistance to implementing our new client service standards is becoming a liability." Henderson leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "Marcus, you're a talented account manager with strong presentation skills and strategic thinking abilities. But this industry is changing, and clients expect more personal attention and authentic relationships than they used to. Sarah's methods aren't just trendy techniques. They're the future of how successful agencies will operate." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Henderson outlining a performance improvement plan that would require Marcus to demonstrate measurable progress in client relationship management over the following quarter. The alternative, though not explicitly stated, was clearly termination. As Marcus walked back to his office, He was forced to acknowledge that his jealousy had not only failed to damage Sarah's career, it had systematically destroyed his own professional standing. Every attempt to undermine her success had only highlighted the effectiveness of her methods and his own resistance to professional growth. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Sarah had been promoted again, this time to Vice President of Client Experience, with responsibility for client relationships across the agency's entire portfolio. She had spoken at 4 industry conferences, published articles in 3 trade magazines, and been featured in a case study about innovative client service strategies. Under her leadership, Henderson and Associates had become known throughout the Chicago marketing community as the agency that truly understood relationship-driven business growth. They had waiting lists for new client openings and had been approached by several larger agencies interested in acquisition, though Henderson had declined all offers. Marcus, meanwhile, had struggled to meet the performance standards outlined in his improvement plan. He eventually left Henderson and Associates to join a larger, more traditional agency where relationship building was less prioritized and his presentation-focused approach was still valued. But even in his new role, he found himself competing against agencies that had adopted Sarah's methods, making his job more challenging than it had ever been. The irony that would follow Marcus for years to come was that his jealousy had been the catalyst for Sarah's transformation from an overlooked employee into an industry leader. Every attempt to undermine her had instead created opportunities for her to demonstrate her value and prove the effectiveness of her approach. Sarah, now confident and recognized as a thought leader in client relations, often reflected on how Marcus's jealousy had inadvertently shaped her career trajectory. Without his challenges and attempts at sabotage, she might have remained content to work quietly with her small portfolio of satisfied clients, never realizing the broader impact her methods could have. In industry circles, Sarah Martinez became known as the woman who revolutionized client relationship management, transforming an entire agency's approach to business development and setting new standards for client service excellence. Her name appeared regularly in trade publications, conference speaker lists, and professional development curricula. Marcus's jealousy had indeed made her unforgettable, though not in the way he had intended. Instead of exposing her methods as unsustainable or naive, his opposition had forced her to articulate, defend, and systematize her approach in ways that made it teachable and scalable. His attempts to undermine her had inadvertently provided the pressure that transformed her quiet competence into visible leadership. Years later, when Sarah was interviewed for a Harvard Business Review article about relationship-driven business growth, she would be asked about the key factors that had enabled her success. While she mentioned her education, her natural empathy for clients, and her commitment to authentic communication, she always acknowledged that opposition and jealousy from colleagues had played an unexpected role in her development. Sometimes the people who challenge us most directly are inadvertently our greatest teachers, she would say. Not because they're trying to help us grow, but because they force us to understand and defend our own value in ways we might never have discovered otherwise. Sarah Martinez had indeed emerged from the shadows into power, becoming unforgettable not just within her own agency, but throughout her entire industry. And while Marcus's jealousy had been the catalyst for this transformation, Sarah's character, competence, and commitment to authentic client relationships had been the foundation that made her success both sustainable and inspiring to others who followed her path.